Hello everyone, welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this module, we will discuss the concept of Diaglosia. It was in 1959 that Charles Ferguson introduced the concept of Diglosia. He noticed that in certain societies, you don't notice a situation that could exactly be called bilingual, but on the other hand, it was also not a monolingual kind of situation. In these situations, one noticed two distinct varieties, that is high variety and low variety of language, which were used in entirely different domains. In a sense, all societies are diglossic, as in there will be a variety associated with religion or formal high level education, which may be quite different from the variety used by people at home or when they are with their friends. According to Ferguson, Diglossia is a relatively stable language situation in which in addition to the primary dialects of language, there is a very divergent and highly codified superposed variety. And this superposed variety will be the vehicle of a large and respected body of written literature, either of an earlier period or in another speech community, which is learned largely by formal education and is used for most written and formal spoken purposes, but is not used by any sector of the community for ordinary conversation. Now let's examine these features in some detail. First of all, as in many other societies, there may be one or several regional standards. However, in addition to them, there will be a high and a low variety of the same language. From now on, high variety will be called as H and the low variety will be L. So the H variety would be highly codified, that is, it would have its own standard grammar, it will have dictionaries and reference books. It would also have a long tradition of widely acknowledged written literature in it, and it's important that Ferguson says written, suggesting that it must have a writing system and a literary tradition. So the H variety of a language should have a writing system and a literary tradition of its own. Many oral yet unwritten languages may have rich literary tradition, but they won't qualify to for being an H variety. So even though a language do not have a written tradition, written literary tradition, it may still be called as a language, but it won't be qualified for being an H variety. This literary tradition does not have to be there in the contemporary language situation. It may be of an earlier period or may exist in other society. It functions as a reference point basically. The H variety would have to be learned in a formal situation, and it would not be used in any informal situations. And therefore, all members of the society will not have access to the H variety or high variety of a language, since as we all know, not everyone is privileged enough to have a formal education and or to have a high level education. So since high variety of language is can only be learnt in a formal setup, not every member of a society will get access to the H variety of a language. Ferguson chose four distinct language situations which provided him the basis for formulating his concept of Diaglosia. And these languages are Arabic, German, Haitian Creole and Greek. In each one of these situations, he gave powerful reasons to distinguish between H and L varieties of languages. So, for example, in the Arabic world, there is a H variety of Classical Arabic and L variety of Egyptian. And similarly in Switzerland, the German spoken in Switzerland has two varieties, H and L varieties, and the H variety is a standard German and the L variety is Swiss German. Again, in Haiti, the Haitian Creole spoken in Haiti again has two varieties, which is H and L variety, the H being French and L is Creole. So such a situation tends to appear when a given variety creates a rich literary tradition of its own, and what happens eventually is that the literacy rate drops dramatically and H and L are separated. These varieties are distinguished on the basis of functions, prestige, codification, elaboration, grammatical complexity and accusation. If you have to distinguish between the H and L variety, all you have to check is these factors. So the H and L varieties are distinguished on the basis of function, prestige, codification, elaboration, grammatical complexity and accusation. So the lexicon may largely be shared even though they are phonologically and semantically often distinct. H has a large technical vocabulary specific to it, just as L has a large set of colloquial expressions specific to it. There may also be a shared phonological core, but H additionally have a divergent subsystem. For example, let's look at the lexicons of the H and L varieties of Greek. So, for the word wine, the word in the H variety of Greek is inos, and the word for wine in the L variety is krasi. Similarly, let's take up the word house. The word for house in the H variety of Greek is ikos and L variety is spiti. The lexicon for wine in the H variety of Greek is inos and L variety of the lexicon is krasi. Now let's discuss more about the functions of diglossia. The most fundamental basis on which Ferguson makes the H and L distinction is almost the complete separation of their functions in different domains of activity. So, what it suggests is that each variety has its own particular domain. We'll come to it later. H variety of a language is largely associated with formal and guarded functions, whereas the L variety is associated with homely and informal domains. So now when we discuss about these domains, anything, let's say a personal space between a friend is one domain, and educational space is another set of domain, and church is another domain. So here what happens is the H and L varieties of language do not get mixed up. If for example, let's say in this, a sermon in the church or a mosque always happens in the H variety of a language. It will not cross the border and it will not cross the domain and use L variety. It always use H variety. Similarly, other domains where we use H variety of a language is in television, newspaper, editorials, and lecture halls, parliament, etc. So and there are other cases where we use L variety of a language. For example, in folk literature, we use the L variety of language. And if you have to interact with your maid or your very close friend, you mostly use the L variety of the language. So as I mentioned, each situation is associated with either H or L variety of a language. It is important to note that not even a single domain will overlap. That is, you may use either H in a particular domain or L in a certain domain. You cannot cross the boundaries. For example, it will sound weird if a news broadcasting channel uses the L variety, or if somebody in a diglossic situation tried to talk in the H variety on the street, he would be laughed at. Now we'll look into the other features. There are several other parameters on which the H and L varieties are distinguished in addition to their specific functional roles. Some of these features are prestige, literary heritage, acquisition, standardization, grammar, stability, and lexicon. We will now look into each one of these separately. In terms of prestige, the H variety of a language is always the more prestigious, and people treat it with a sense of respect. So, like we have a similar case in bilingualism also. Let's consider India. In India, if you speak a dialect, like there are two people and one person speaks a tribal language and the other person speaks Hindi or English, the person who speaks Hindi or English somehow gets more respect, as Hindi or English carries some prestige along with it. So, in terms of prestige, the H variety of a language is always the more prestigious, and people treat it with some sense of respect. It does not matter if it is intelligible or not. The very fact that it is used in a socially elevated domains is reason good enough to treat it respectfully. Another important feature is literary heritage. The celebrated literary tradition of H may be there in contemporary times, but it will certainly have its roots in hundreds of years of writing. It may also have its in another speech community, and that does not matter. For example, for Haiti and German speaking Switzerland, German speaking in Switzerland, the H may be in France or German. On the other hand, for Arabic and Greek, it is in the literature of centuries of that part of the world. The next important feature is next important parameter is acquisition. As mentioned earlier, nobody acquires the H variety as a native language. It has to be learnt through formal training. As I have mentioned earlier, since H variety of a language is given, used in a formal setting, no one gets it as a native language. We'll have to learn it with a conscious effort in a formal setting. Educated elite would generally acquire it in schools and colleges, learning grammar and a set of new lexical items. And this naturally leads to a belief that H has grammar and L has no grammar. On the other hand, L is the language of the community and is used at home for talking among friends. L, as opposed to the H variety, is thus easily acquired as a native variety. Standardization is yet another important feature. It is a H form of a language that is standardized by the usual means of formal codification. That is, it is a H variety of a language for which we have dictionaries or grammar rules or pronunciation dictionaries, etc. Such kind of rule books or prescriptive grammars are not available for the L variety. The alphabet and spelling rules of H are established and do not vary much. Writing in L is difficult because of the lack of established spelling rules. But in most cases, no one wants to write in L anyway. The L variety of language is used in spoken tradition and in oral tradition, and no one really would want to use the L variety of language in writing. And therefore, when it comes to writing, everyone chooses to use the H variety of language. In case of grammar, even though H and L are varieties of same language, there are important grammatical differences that separate the two. For example, Standard German has 4 noun cases and 2 simple indicative tenses, whereas Swiss German has only 3 cases of noun and 1 simple tense. If the separation between H and L has to be maintained, then there has to be a stability that would last for centuries. Even though borrowing from H to L may happen, it would be very rare that H borrows from L. As we saw in the examples of H and L varieties of Greek, one of the most striking features of H and L is the difference between their lexicon. So the same word may have totally different lexicon in the two varieties. The H variety may have one word and the L variety may have a different name for the same word. In most cases, there would be a learned lexical item in the H variety that would pair with its colloquial version in L. On the other hand, there would be several colloquial items of L in the domain of home and marketplaces that would not find any place in H. So, like we have already mentioned, the H and L varieties of language do not cross domains, and it has its own separate domains and they never overlap each other. So the H variety, the vocabulary or the lexicon in H variety may not find a place in the domain of L variety, where L variety is used. Let's now discuss more about the stability of diglossia. There is indeed a possibility that diglossic situation with the established patterns of use of H and L may become stable and last for centuries. It may last for centuries. On the other hand, the situation can change, particularly under 2 specific conditions, and we will now discuss those 2 conditions. One, the literary rate may go up and more people may start learning the H variety. So this is likely to happen with increasing number of people entering higher education and with the broadening of communication systems in the H variety of a language. Secondly, the formation of a nation state may raise the question of the choice for a national language. In such case, people would fight for L, maybe with its standardization from H. Even though not really diglossic, we have a comparable situation that can be cited from the Constitution of India. So as we have already mentioned in the previous module, when it came to the decision of having a national language, a consensus had to be built among people who were fighting for Hindi, Urdu, Hindustani, Sanskrit and languages like Bengali, Tamil and Telugu. Hence the Constituent Assembly decided not to have a national language at all and decided to have official language, that is Hindi and English. Now let's discuss about the modification and dilution of diglossia. Beginning with Fishman, many scholars have tried to modify and dilute the classical concept of diglossia. Fishman attempted to examine bilingualism and diglossia together. Ferguson's concept of diglossia prevents bilingual situations as H and L are varieties of the same language. Referring to Gumper's, Fisherman says, Diglossia exists not only in multilingual societies which officially recognizes several languages, and not only in societies which utilize vernacular and classical varieties, but also in societies which employ separate dialects, registers, or functionally differentiated language varieties of whatever kind. Now, this is a very broad definition. Here Fishman and Gumpers are talking of all kinds of language situation, and in that case it would be difficult to exclude any situation in this scenario. Here all society becomes diglossic. Under such a definition, all society becomes diglossic. Many scholars have extended the concept to the use of English as H and the use of some regional languages as L. But many speakers use English for day-to-day communication and other encounters, and such a situation is excluded from Ferguson's conceptualization of diglossia. For Fishman, bilingualism was a matter of an individual and largely concerned with psycholinguistic aspect, and diglossia as a societal matter. So, for Fishman, bilingualism had a psycholinguistic aspect and diglossia had a societal aspect to it. For drawing bilingualism and diglossia together, he suggested that the prestigious and low varieties of languages be considered as H and L respectively, and proposed a model at the intersection of bilingualism and diglossia. It includes the existence of both diglossia and bilingualism, bilingualism without diglossia, diglossia without bilingualism, and neither diglossia nor bilingualism. For the classical Fergusonian formulation, both bilingualism and diglossia cannot coexist. Diglossia for him is essentially a situation where H and L varieties of the same language are functionally separated. However, Fishman suggested that such a situation exists in Paraguay, where we have both bilingualism and diglossia. That is, H would correspond to Spanish and L would correspond to Guarani. Most speakers know both the languages, and mostly they are functionally separated. Bilingualism without diglossia, according to Fishman, would inevitably lead to language shift, since there will not be a clear functional separation of the languages. This, however, is not true of the Indian situation. In India, there are a large number of bilinguals who may use their languages in many situations, and in some cases they mix the languages fairly on a regular basis. An example of bilingualism without diglossia, in which L is receded before H, is the German-speaking area of Belgium. Thus, the shift to French from German is being preceded by the widespread bilingualism, to which either language may be used for nearly any purpose. As society which neither have diglossia nor bilingualism, according to Fishman, is self-liquidating. Extensions made by Fishman and others violate the basic conditions of diglossia set up by Ferguson. Fishman goes on and cites 4 configurations, where H is classical and L as vernacular. In this case, the two are genetically related, as in Sanskrit and Hindi, And the next is where he says H is classical and L is vernacular, and the two are not genetically related, as in textual Hebrew and Yiddish. And the next configuration is where H is formal or is a written variety, and L is vernacular in bilingual setting, as we saw in case of Paraguay, where both Spanish and Guarani are used. H as the next one is H as a written and formal variety, whereas L is a vernacular, and where the two are where the two languages, where the two varieties are genetically related. In none of these cases we are talking of varieties of the same language that are completely functionally separated as proposed by Ferguson. In this module, we looked at the various definition of diglossia and tried to understand the functions and other features of diglossia. I hope this video helped you in understanding the modifications in the definition of diglossia. Thank you.